Start getting excited about theology, and it does not take long before the topic of Calvinism versus Arminianism comes up. And then words like Pelagianism and semi-Pelagianism and Reform versus free will, and what is soteriology, and how does this work? That just starts to really get wrapped up in the conversation. You have very passionate people speaking very passionately from their positions, and the irony of it all is most of them have no idea about the Canons of Dort, and that this conversation has been playing out for many years. I'm Bryan Catherman with SaltyBeliever.com, and today I am talking about a great book, Saving the Reformation, the Pastoral Theology of the Canons of Dort by W. Robert Godfrey. This book is published by Reformation Trust. It's about 265 pages, and in a minute I'll tell you kind of what's contained in here. I do want to say this does come from a Reformed bias. However, because of what's in the pages, it is a very helpful book regardless of which side of this debate and conversation you land on. So maybe just hear me out for a minute. Okay, so here's what you get in this book. You have on the front end a little history of what's going on. You have a discussion as the Reformation has been moving along, and now there's some theological discussion playing out. Students of Jacob Arminius and those who hold the Calvinistic views, and they're reading Institutes and John Calvin's work, and the churches are trying to figure out how to work together. As these issues are coming to light, a conversation needs to happen, and so they draw this big gathering at Dordrecht, the Synod of Dort, and from that we have a response to a statement called the Remonstrants of 1610. That's this theological position put up, and then in response this one's put up, and it's from where we get things like tulip, although this really didn't outline tulip. If you're familiar with that, this didn't put that clear as can be. There's 5 heads of doctrine. They both made 5 big points. There's articles within them. And so tulip is really almost a cheeky summary of much deeper, bigger things in here. And so you get the history of why they brought this thing together. And then you get a new translation. So if you're an English reader like me, it's very helpful, of the Remonstrants of 1610. Here's what's been put forward. Then you get a new translation of the Canons, which is the response, the standard that's the response. This is after this long gathering and working through this, and there's a little bit of history on what happened there. Here's the response. Here's these 5 heads of doctrines, and then a series of articles in each of those heads. And then beyond that, the author provides some, commentary, kind of a, what does each of these canons and what do these articles really mean, and is there some things we should think about, which is really interesting when you get to sections about, are babies justified if they die, and there's a lot of kind of some debate you don't think about in there. These guys also, ironically, at this same gathering dealt with things like the Sabbath and how do we handle evening services, and so there's some things like that you find in the book, and you find that in the appendices. It's not just all about the order of salvation and just, do we love Calvin or not? It's not that, and that's really not what this book is about, nor the Canons of Dort are about. It's about dealing with the theological issue and kind of seeing how we're going to work out that debate. Sadly, that debate is still playing out, and now we've added on both sides of it, and nobody knows the history. There's also a great appendices here of a history of Jacob Arminius. This thing is footnoted well. There's lots of other resources you can find in here. As you're looking through this, you can see, okay, who's talking about what scripture and how is this working? And just going through the book actually will really help you say, this was the discussion, this was the argument, this was how they viewed scripture. And you kind of go, okay, maybe it's not just about picking a camp and saying, that's my crew, I'm going to hang with this side of the debate. It's actually about knowing where that all comes from. I can't tell you how many guys I've run into that are on one side or the other, and they debate and they argue, and I could have, and occasionally while I was reading this, I did, text statements from one side or the other. I could send something from the Remonstrants of 1610 to a Calvinist, and the Calvinist, I would say a neo or maybe cage Calvinist even, they come back and say, oh, that's terrible, that's the worst. And then I'd send them something from the response, and they go, that's horrible, they don't understand Calvinism. I'm like, what? That's both sides. Or they'd agree with something from one side that's not their stance, and then because they don't know the history. And admittedly, I've been there before too, and reading through this in the new translation has made it a lot easier reading. I think it's helpful to have something that's a little smoothed out so that a person can sit here and read through it. If you've read a previous translation of the Canons of Dort in English, it can be hard, it can be clunky. This is done so well. Plus the history, plus the commentary. I found this to be a fascinating read. And so regardless of where you stand on the topic, I would like to challenge you to take a look at this book, read through it, and see how both sides were arguing their points. Again, it's a lot biased to the Reform side, but if you are not good with that, that's okay. Be challenged in your thinking. If you are good with that, don't just side with it. See why Dr. Godfrey says what he says. And I want to encourage that if you're interested in the topic, if you like church history, if you're interested in the Reformation, if you're interested in this issue of soteriology, you go out and you get the book and you work through it so that you can be quite a bit more informed the next time you have that theological conversation.